I'm Bryan Hyde, and I'm telling it like it is. So how do you know the difference between a good law and a bad law? See, the answer to that question is going to determine whether you get good government or bad government. Let me ask this question. Would it be right to deprive your neighbor of some of his freedom so that he couldn't do something wrong, even make an honest mistake? In fact, let me ask that another way. Would it be right for your neighbor to deprive you of some of your freedom in order to prevent you from making a mistake? See, the way you answer that question determines whether you get totalitarianism or freedom. But first we have to understand that there are different types of laws. There are two basic categories of law. One is called mala in se. All this means is an act that would be considered by any civilized person to be evil in and of itself, an act in which there's a victim. Rape, robbery, murder, arson, those are mala in se laws, and people are punished after they commit those crimes according to the law. The other category is called mala prohibita. This is essentially a rule by the state at some level that says you can't do that. For instance, in Utah, it's illegal to fish from horseback. So if you were walking along the lakeshore one day and you saw a guy sitting on a horse fishing, would your first instinct be to call 911? Probably not. Sure, the law's on the book, and sure, if you know the law, you recognize he's doing something illegal, but it's not the same thing as if he were actively trying to kill someone, trying to rape someone, trying to rob someone. See the difference? So now it comes down to the question of, so what is the proper role of government in applying those laws? And it turns out there are two different ways that laws can be applied. They can either be applied in a protective function, which only punishes after an actual act of harm has taken place, or they can be applied in a preventative fashion, which means that everybody's freedom is restricted just in case they might be thinking about doing something wrong. As you might have guessed, only one of these approaches is really conducive to freedom. A good example of preventative law would be a seatbelt law. I mean, we can all agree we want people to be safe when they're driving. We want to make sure that lives aren't unnecessarily lost. That's a good and noble goal, right? But a seatbelt law punishes people for not wearing their seatbelt, whether something bad happens or not. In fact, let me pose this question. Let's just say that I was going to drive somewhere today, and I choose not to put my seatbelt on. And I get in my car, and I drive to my destination, and I arrive safely. Now, according to the law, I was supposed to wear my seatbelt. So I'm going to ask you, was a crime committed? And if so, who was the victim? On the other hand, if I arrived safely, is there anyone who is a victim? See, a seatbelt law would punish me as if I had actually done something wrong. And coincidentally, the only way that I can make that wrong right is to pay the state some of my money. See, something there doesn't smell quite right. On the other hand, a law that punishes, say, reckless driving. If I were driving recklessly, forcing people up on the sidewalk or otherwise damaging people's property or causing a threat to public safety, now I actually have caused harm by my actions. I should be held accountable. Can you see the difference between preventative law, which seeks to restrict people's behavior beforehand, it's actually called prior restraint, versus protective law, which only brings the state into play after an actual injury has taken place? We don't want bad things to happen, so a lot of people choose to embrace preventative law because that can keep bad things from happening, except it can't. And when it can't, more laws are piled upon more laws, and we end up with oppressive, draconian government. Protective law, on the other hand, only comes into play when an actual bad act or injury has occurred, and only comes into play in the interest of justice, what is fair being done. One of these philosophies jives with freedom, and one of them doesn't. I hope you can see the difference. I'm Bryan Hyde, and I'm telling it like it is.